Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today you are tuning in to Spell It Out, Magic, Reflections, and Shadows, where I pick a topic and I run with it. So this year I've started off with a theme connected to the court cards of the Thoth deck created by Aleister Crowley and Lady Frida Harris. This is my second part, and I'm going to be focused only on the knights today. So it'll be a lot of fun. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our broadcast. We're having a lot of fun doing this, and look forward to a lot more shows in this year coming up. Next week, we have Dan Moore, our occultist and Kabbalist friend, and it's always fun to have him visit, and we'll get into some very esoteric philosophy for those of you who are fascinated by such things as we are. And we're going to have all kinds of other great stuff coming up as well. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It helps us to cover some of our production costs and maybe sign up for our newsletter. And then the biggest thing you can do is just hit like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And certainly YouTube pays attention to that, and it helps them to promote our show a little bit too. And tell your friends. And if you guys have anybody that you think might make a great guest, reach out to us. We're always looking for new people to interview as well. So I don't want to take up too much time. So I'm going to kick it back to Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. So today I'm going to break it up into sort of a few different parts with the knights. I thought what I would do is talk about the knights in general from Aleister Crowley's point of view, from the Book of Thoth, as well as my own experience of working with the knight with the Kabbalah. And then I'm going to go through each of the knights. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to read some parts from the Book of Thoth because of the description of the knights. I'm going to go over some of the specifics associated with the knights, but not everything. For instance, I'm not going to be doing the I Ching just because it's just so much to get into, and I'm not as familiar with that, though I totally recommend people studying it. So and then I have sort of a unique way in which I have studied the knights, which I'm going to include, and I will tell you when I get to each of the knights. So let's get started with knights in general. What is the knight in general in terms of how Aleister Crowley views it in the Book of Thoth? He says they represent the powers of the letter Yod in the name of God, the tetragrammaton name. And, quote, they are the most sublime, original, active part of the energy of the element. For this reason, they are represented on horseback and clad in complete armor. Their action is swift and violent, but transient. So that's just a general look at the knights. I do agree with some of this myself, the idea that they're very active and the idea that they represent energy, which is something you can get a little bit lost in that idea with Aleister Crowley because he does go into specific descriptions of the personalities, but he is really does really emphasize the energy aspect of all of the court cards, and he was unique in doing that, I believe. I don't know if anyone had done it before him. And so even though there's a psychological component, to me the most important is the energy aspect of it. So I agree with that. I would say that I'm going to just list some of the general characteristics of the knight. So for me, when I look at the knight, the first thing I recall is its position on the tree of life. And it's connected to the second Sephiroth. And so it's also connected to the top of the right-hand pillar. So that's where I start with. And so for me, all of the knights have some general characteristics in common. And certainly we'll talk about how I view the suits. And these are some of the characteristics I have found in the knights. They're very passionate. It's a very individualistic energy, very egocentric, which can be positive or negative. It's connected more to the warrior archetype. The right-hand path is futuristic, so the knight itself is more futuristic, more visionary. They can be more loners, but they can also be leaders. Certainly because of that independence, they're not necessarily group-oriented all the time unless they're running the group. There's a kind of compulsive energy to the knight, so you can kind of see that sometimes with obsessive-compulsive people. Knight can certainly be impatient. Patience is not what they're good at. Very action-oriented. They're the doers to me. They can be extroverted, but again, most people aren't completely a knight, so you might have to look at the mix of the cards if you're looking at someone's psychology, I would say. They're very interested, to me, the knights are very interested in pursuing in their life their own passions and desires. And this becomes a practical thing if you're looking to help someone pick a career and they have a lot of that knight energy. They're rebels. They can be mavericks. They can certainly stand out in a crowd. They're not the most invisible of energies. And so those are just a few of the traits I associate with the knights. There was something else I was going to say about the knight. Now it just slipped my mind a little bit. So anyway, so the suits. So the way when you read Aleister Crowley, and we're going to go over some of how he uses the suits to wrestle with the complexities of the knights. The way Michael and I see the suits are a little different from most people. So we see the suit of wands representing, in general, the individual. The suit of cups represents the outer world, the life, and therefore can also be people. The suit of swords can be thought or action, depending on what number it's associated with. And the discs are the results or manifestation. So for me, when I look at the knights, I don't look at normally the different personalities of the Knight of Discs and the Knight of Cups the way Aleister Crowley would, unless perhaps it's representing the psychological layout, and it's in the psychological aspect of the reading. So I look at the Knight of Cups representing maybe pursuing things in my life, or if it's an attainment card, I'm going to attain some things in my life that I really want and desire. I can't overestimate the passion of the Knights. I don't really ever see them lacking that. And as I said, the ego can be something that can be important to develop, certainly with the Knights, but certainly can be a problem for the Knights. They have to be able to master their ego probably more than some of the other ones. But they can be super successful as a result, and certainly very entertaining, that energy. So that's a little bit about how I view the general Knights. So let me jump into more of each of the specific ones. So what I'm going to do is start with some of, not traditional, but what Aleister Crowley has written about it, the correspondences connected to each of the court cards. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about just my experience. And I'm going to add in something unique. What I did one year, just to have fun with the court cards, is I would place a court card under my pillow at night. And I did this for each court card. I did it for a week, and I would record diligently whatever dreams I remembered. And I still haven't really deciphered all of it. It was actually quite overwhelming what happened. And I'm a dreamer, so I sort of expected to have some dreams, but not the level of dreams that I had. So I certainly highly recommend you try that if you're interested in getting to know the court cards. It was really, really fascinating. And as I said, I'm still trying to figure out what some of it means. So let's start with the Knight of Wands. I am going to hold up the card for you that are out there and can see this, but I highly recommend you look at it. If you're just listening, you can find it, Google it, the Knight of Wands, and you can see it's a very fiery and dramatic looking card, this is a perfect example of the Knight of Wands, if you ask me. So the Knight of Wands is the fiery part of fire. So all of the knights are connected to fire. And Crowley writes that it rules 20 degrees of Scorpio to 20 degrees of Sagittarius. So the complication with the rulership of the court cards in the Crowley deck is that it is a mix of for instance, the knight, it's at the end of the fixed sign, and it goes into 2 decans of the mutable signs. So largely speaking, the knights are representing the mutable signs, but it's a little complicated. And I'm sure there's a reason. I don't know. That alone makes it a little more complicated because it's not just a fixed sign or a mutable sign, but is one way in which you can also understand exactly what the court cards are by their astrology. The other thing that's interesting about that, and Lon Duquette says the dates for that are November 13th to December 12th, by the way. You can use all of the court cards for specific timing if you memorize that. Now, I don't do that yet, but I do know maybe the approximation of when they come up and what they represent. So I can sort of say, okay, I know that's going to be, around Scorpio time or Sagittarius time. So that's one of the practical things you can do with the court cards with timing. So the other thing I did want to mention, because I liked the description, is the idea that they each have these names that are really beautiful. So the original title for the Knight of Wands was the Lord of the Flame and the Lightning, the King of the Spirits of Fire, and the King of the Salamanders. And by the way, the knights in other decks are the kings. So that if you want to look at the Waite deck, that's the equivalent. And Donald Tyson, in his book on tarot magic, he associates the Knight of Wands with lightning, violent, and quick strike. And again, you can see why, with all that double fire, it'd be associated literally with fire. And there is an elemental quality to these cards. You can see it, and I'll talk about my own experience with that. So I thought it'd be fun to read a little bit about the description of the personality of the Knight of Wands from the Book of Thoth. And this is not the whole, it'd be impossible to read all of it. So although I think Milo Duquette is reading the Book of Thoth on YouTube somewhere if you want to listen. So here's what Crowley writes. He says, the moral qualities appropriate to this figure are activity, generosity, fierceness, impetuosity, pride, impulsiveness, swiftness, and unpredictable actions. If wrongly energized, he is evil-minded, cruel, bigoted, and brutal. He is in either case ill-fitted to carry on his action. He has no means of modifying it according to circumstances. If he fails in his first effort, he has no resource. So what I liked about that was the activity, the fierceness, the pride, the swiftness, the unpredictability. I think there is an unpredictability in general with the knights, in the sense that knights tend to do whatever they want to do, in a sense, so it's sort of, they have that more, they're not necessarily stable characteristics. So they're not, you can't really just kind of know their character and that's it. So I like that a lot. One of the things that I found with the Knight of Wands is if you are a person that tends to give away all your energy to other people, and you lose yourself a little, if you work with the Knight of Wands in a meditative kind of way, it allows you to touch base with your individualism. And it's a really powerful way to use these cards, is to balance your own personality, and so to say, okay, maybe I'm being too impetuous, so maybe I'll balance it another way. So I did find that to be true of the Knight of Wands. The other thing was with the dreams of the Knight of Wands, of all the knights, I had the most crazy, biblical, interesting dreams with the Knight of Wands. And it made me think about the fact that the Knight of Wands could be a visionary, literally. And so again, it's, I always, for me, I think of sort of the middle pillar as sort of channeling the truth and clarity. But because of the kind of dreams I had with the Knight of Wands, I really look at it a little more different. And so that is one of the experiences I had just working with the Knight of Wands. One of my dreams was a plague of frogs. and so that was really funny. Another thing too about the Knight of Wands is I actually met the Knight of Wands in a dream, and he reminded me to think about the Fool. And so the Fool, of course, connects into the knights. And so that idea that when you look at the court cards, you can also look at the surrounding cards and sort of interpret them based on that. The knight feeds into the queen through the empress. And so that's another interesting way to think about the cards, which is what my goal is, to get you to realize that tarot is a thinking tool, and that it becomes much more powerful when you learn to puzzle over it and say, well, that's an interesting combination of cards, and how does that produce the pattern? What are the energies here? You will have much deeper readings with people, and you will certainly never get bored. So that's a little bit about the Knight of Wands. So let's move on to the next knight. So I'm going to go in order of how they appear on the Tree of Life, because to me, it's going from sort of concept to materialization. So the next one would be the Knight of Cups for me. And so what Crowley says about that, of course, it's the fiery part of water. And he calls it water's power of solution, which was interesting. I sort of like that. And it rules 20 degrees Aquarius to 20 degrees Pisces. And we are actually in the period of the Knight of Cups right now because it's February 9th to March 10th. The original titles for the Knight of Cups was, they were Lord of the Waves and the Waters, the King of the Hosts of the Sea, the King of Nymphs and Undines. And then Tyson writes that it's connected to fountain, rapid, welling forth. So rapid welling forth of water. And you could certainly see that. Oh, I forgot to show you. Here's the card. And by the way, you can also delve into all the symbolism in the card and study that, which is in the Book of Thoth and also Lon Mildred-Duquette's great book about Crowley's deck. There's all other ways to really get into the cards so that you really get to know the cards and get to understand them. And so when you go to do a reading, all of this is sort of in your subconscious mind percolating. And then you have to learn to sort of trust that whatever comes out is the correct thing for the reading. So this is how I approach readings. It's more like I'm making friends with the cards. I'm getting to know them in new ways. I'm not just thinking, oh, now I know you. I'm not going to worry. I got all my interpretations down. That just doesn't hold well for me. And plus, it's a little bit boring overall. So the Knight of Cups, as I was saying, I wrote actually a fairly long quote, so I might have to jump through some of this. I don't think I have time to read it all, but it's interesting. Some of the descriptions of the knights in the Book of Thoth do seem a little bit more negative. And this one does, particularly the Knight of Cups. I'll start off with the beginning of the quote and see how much I can read. The characteristics of the person signified by this card are nevertheless mostly passive in accordance with the zodiacal attribution. He is graceful, dilettante with the qualities of Venus or a weak Jupiter. He is amiable in a passive way. He is quick to respond to attraction and easily becomes enthusiastic under such stimulus, but he is not very enduring. He's exceedingly sensitive to external influence, but with no material depth in his character. Well, that's not so great. Here's the one. He tends to mismanage all his affairs, and unless sheer good fortune attends him, his whole career will be an unbroken record of failure and disaster. And then Crowley writes that there's a tendency to go into sort of a mental madness or schizophrenia because of a misuse of drugs, which, by the way, any of the knights could probably get into addiction. They're risk takers. Anyway, so after reading that, I said, oh my God, if I was born during that period of time, I might say I'm going to be just a complete failure. But Lon Mildred-Duquette, in his book, he gives examples of famous people who are born under the period of time that the court cards represent. And so guess what? There's some pretty powerful people born during this time. We have George Washington, Abe Lincoln, and Susan B. Anthony. So again, you have to kind of wonder, did Aleister Crowley have a run-in with the Knight of Cups? Is that why he's a little bit hard on the Knight of Cups? I don't see any of the knights personally as being weak. In my experience in readings, they have a pretty strong opinion about things, and they're not going to change their minds very easily. So I can't really agree with some of the characterization of the Knight of Cups that Crowley has here. And then the dreams I had with the Knight of Cups was the first one was actually really interesting, and it was the very first dream I had after putting it under my pillow at night. And I was explaining to someone in the dream how to manifest something you want. And the right-hand path and the knights, they do seem to be really focused on the ability to manifest. Like, how can I manifest things? How can I create things? It's a very creative energy that way. And so I was explaining how you did it, and you would build the image in your mind. I used a home for an example. And then I said, once you build the image, you look for synchronicities. So that was interesting because I think that does really correlate to me with the Knight of Cups, since the cup is the forming of something. It's not, representing emotions like some people think. So I like that dream. I also like the dream where I have this dream during the Knight of Cups period where there's a large group of women practicing a very intricate Tai Chi that seemed very knight-like. The suit of cups represented the women because the cups are actually connected to Binah and to the three. So I thought, wow, that really is a metaphor for the Knight of Cups because the knight and the cup. So that was pretty cool. And then during that week, there was actually water overflowing outside in the sewer area. And there was also my upstairs neighbor had a spark kind of go off when she turned the lights on. So that was the fire and the water. So I thought, wow, that's kind of literal. So I think they can really represent elemental forces. I think that's actually really true. So that's a little bit about the Knight of Cups. So let's move on to the Knight of Swords, which is such a pretty card. It has a kind of dragonfly feeling to it. And I love there's three little birds on the side there. Now you can see all of the knights so far, the horses are moving. It's a very active energy. And then you can kind of look at the different movements and sort of see how they relate to the element. So that's kind of a cool thing to notice. So where are my notes here? So we're now on the Knight of Swords, which is the fiery part of air. And that rules, the Knight of Swords rules 20 degrees of Taurus to 20 degrees of Gemini. According to Crowley, he represents the idea of attack. Now, the knights really do have that kind of attack energy. And that is because they are associated with the warrior archetype. So the attack can be on an idea, though. It can be, I'm going after this concept. I'm going to... And knights need challenges. They want to be challenged. They hate to be bored. And so to me, that is a good phrase to think of in general with the knights. Lawn Duquette says it's May 11th to June 10th. So if you're born during that period, the Knight of Swords is one of your cards. Some of the other titles of this card, the Lord of the Winds and Breezes, King of the Spirits of Air, and King of the Sylphs and Sylphides. And Tyson says it's wind, swift pressure brought to bear. So let's see what the Book of Thoth says about the Knight of Swords. The moral qualities of a person thus indicated are activity and skill, subtlety and cleverness. He is fierce, delicate, and courageous. I don't know about delicate. But altogether, the prey of his idea, which comes to him as an inspiration without reflection. If ill-dignified, the vigor in all these qualities being absent, he is incapable of decision or purpose. Any action that he takes is easily brushed aside by opposition. This is my favorite quote. It is the true will exploding the mind spontaneously. That is such an Aleister Crowley statement. I love that. Exploding the mind spontaneously. And so, you see this connected more to the mind, which he does with most of the swords, actually, even though he does have some negative things to say about the suit of swords, but he's certainly not all negative. So, I agree with some of that. The Knight of Swords, subtlety, no, I really don't see the knights as being subtle, generally speaking, though maybe there's an element because the suit of swords fall in the middle of the tree at Tiferet, the number 6s. But I would say in general, I don't necessarily see, I see the queens having more subtlety probably, or even maybe even the princes might have it, than the knights. They seem to like to show themselves and to have strong opinions, and they're not really shy of that. So I don't really see them as subtle. One of the things when you're working with people that have the characteristics of the knight, let's say they sit down and they have that strong energy indicated by the cards that they draw representing themselves. One of the things, it's hard to persuade them to do something they don't want to do. In fact, you probably can't, but you can manipulate them a little bit. So the way you can work with knights sometimes is to make it seem like it's their idea. The other thing is the knight, again, if you would see an evolved knight, if you can also argue the benefit of doing something, like what would they benefit or how would it benefit people? They would appreciate that too. But it can be quite a stubborn energy when you're dealing with people, especially if you're giving them a reading. So don't think that there's anything wrong with it. It's just an energy. It's just trying to work with the different energies. It's good to know if you are dealing with a knight or a queen or a prince, it just helps you try to understand how can I connect with them correctly. So now one of the things I noticed with my dreams as I progressively went down the tree. So the knights go from according to the suits, you have the wands at the 2s, and then you have the cups at the 3s, and the swords at the 6s, and then Malkuth are the 10s and the discs. So as I went down the tree, I noticed I was not recalling my dreams as much. So I thought that was really interesting. So maybe it was just a little too dense in a sense. And I thought that was a kind of a cool correspondence to the Tree of Life. So anyway, the Knight of Swords, the dream images I had for the Knight of Swords, I didn't really have very much. I had, there was a couple of dreams I had with glass doors, which would make sense, and with the element of air. There was a restaurant with glass doors and a house with glass doors. And then I did have, interesting enough, I did have a little more aggressive dreams. But I also had these 2 men that were in love, holding hands. They were 2 strong men. One was tattooed. And then I had this really horrible dream with this older man that was trying to kill this younger man with a hook. So I was going to look that up. He doesn't really have a hook in the picture, but I thought that was a strange image. And as well as I dreamt of an Aztec urinal. Unfortunately, that's all I remembered of it when I woke up. So again, I didn't have as many dreams that I could recall during that time. I don't remember also really having anything outside that happened, like in the case of the Knight of Cups, where I had the flooding and things like that. So I would say, what is my view of the Knight of Swords personally? Well, it is a very active energy, and depending on, where the knights fall, they represent different things in a reading. So if it's in an outcome position, then I would say there are things moving forward in directions that a person would desire. It would be according to my plans, so to speak. If it represented the outside energy of other people, then I would know I'm dealing with that kind of energy around me, which might be useful if I'm trying to make a business deal, if I'm trying to date. I know the kind of energy to expect and sort of work with in a sense. So I would say certainly with the Knight of Swords, there can be some things that are actually starting to occur and to happen. But again, it would depend on what position in the layout it would fall. So finally we get to the Knight of Coins, which, it really is kind of a little bit of an odd card. It's the shortest knight in all the deck, and it's sort of, I'm not really sure even, I think that Aleister Crowley explains it a little, but it wasn't really satisfying. But one of the things that's interesting about this that he points out is that the horse in this particular picture is standing on the ground. So, and that goes into some of the description of the card and what it represents. So his hooves are all planted on the ground, whereas you have the Knight of Wands only has 2 hooves on the ground. Knight of Swords is like just flying through the air, it looks like. So, and the Knight of Cups, I don't know where the Knight of Cups is. It's such a watery kind of energy, So, but this one is very grounded. And then there's also fields, and there's a sense of fertility in this card. So you can see a really strong connection to nature with the Knight of Discs. And he does go into that in his description. So let's start with sort of the beginning. We know now that this is the fiery part of Earth, and it rules, of course, 20 degrees of Leo to 20 degrees of Virgo. And it's also, he makes a point in the beginning, Aleister Crowley, to mention that this is connected to mountains, earthquakes, and gravitation. Duquette says this rules August 12th to September 11th. And some of the older titles, previous titles of this card were the Lord of the Wide and Fertile Land, which I really like, the King of the Spirits of the Earth, and the King of the Gnome. So maybe that's why he's a little bit shorter in stature. And then Tyson also connects it to mountains and violent pressure. So the Knight of Discs is another one that I think that Aleister Crowley, well, it's mixed. In some ways, you think he must have hated the Knight of Discs, but then there are some beautiful lines in it. And so why does Aleister Crowley tend to do this? Well, I think, from my point of view, he's trying to show the complexity of the cards, that by mixing these elements into each of the court cards, you're not going to get this like tight little description of what they are. And I think it's always important to, even though people have now embraced the idea that these represent the 16 personality types, I think that's a very limited interpretation of the court cards. I think we're working with, again, elemental forces. So one of the things I was thinking of, for instance, is one normally doesn't think that fire and water go together. So the Knight of Cups, that's why we could say if you did see it as elemental, why the Knight of Cups could have some issues. But in the ocean, there are those smokers where you have that volcanic fire coming out, and there's all these crazy creatures that live underwater. And I remember when I discovered that when I was going to school, and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. So what is created with the Knight of Cups could be something quite unusual, not something typical. And so when you start to think of elemental combinations, try not to think of good and bad, oh, this is ill-dignified or dignified, but think of what would it look like, these combinations, because as we see the world growing in consciousness and we discover more things about the world, we see these unusual combinations actually producing positive things. So the Knight of Cups, I meant to mention that too, with the Knight of Cups, to me, it reminds me of that underwater volcanic energy and then all the crazy creatures that are around it. If you look it up, you'll see what I'm talking about. But getting back to the Knight of Discs, he says about, I wrote a pretty long one about this one too, and I think we actually have time for me to go over it. He first points out that, as I said, it is connected more with life and the producer of life. And I talked about the hooves of the horse being planted solidly on the ground. And then he says, those whom he symbolizes tend to be dull, heavy, and preoccupied with material things. They are laborious and patient, but would have little intellectual grasp, even of matters which concern them closely. They lack initiative. Their fire is the smoldering fire of the process of growth. If ill-dignified, these people are hopelessly stupid, slavish, quite incapable of foresight, even in their own affairs, or of taking an intelligent interest in anything outside themselves. Well, that's true of most of the knights. They, as far as not being interested in other people, that is a shadow of them. They interfere with and inevitably spoil whatever comes their way. And I'm like, whoa, what? Do you hate the Knight of Discs, Aleister Crowley? Do you hate? It is it's a mix of Leo and Virgo. And, I guess Leo, the downside of any kind of Leo, they can have a really strong ego, maybe too much so. And then the earth sides, to me, they really do get stereotyped as in ways that really aren't true about earth signs if you know people. And again, if you were to look for people with birthdays during this time, you would find, I'm sure, geniuses. I did start to look, but I didn't have time. But just so you know, he does say something very nice at the end about the Knight of Discs. He says, in the happiest cases, the qualities thus indicated will be romance and imagination, but overweening ambition and the tendency to waste time in idle dreaming are perils all too frequently found in such sons of the soil. So the idea of wasting time with all of the knights, actually, I have found that to be somewhat true. If I meet someone that has a lot of the right-hand pillar cards in their reading, and we've gone through that in some of the old shows, what that is, and you can kind of look it up. There can be a sense, because they have a lot of freedom, and if they're not disciplined, they can waste a lot of time in idleness or pursuing the wrong things, or even pursuing the wrong battles. So all of the knights have to learn to focus on the right battles and really master. I feel like the knights particularly have to master their minds, because they're so driven by their passions and desires, and it's so dependent on their being happy in a sense. I think they really do have to have discipline and ways in which they master themselves even. So I think that that's true of most of the knights. Now, by the time I got to the Knight of Discs, as I said earlier, I wasn't recalling as many dreams. And by the way, I didn't do the knights in a sequence. I did each of the suits, so I did, in the dream work, I started with the Knight of Wands, then I did a week of the Queen of Wands and I did it that way. And looking back, I might do things a little differently, but that was just what made sense to me at the time. So when I had the dream of the Knight of Discs, I did have some interesting creative dreams. I had one dream where I was writing poems or spells on note cards for some reason that were connected to people with Down syndrome. And by the way, I happen to really like people with Down syndrome. I feel like they often are very creative and also emotionally have more insight sometimes than some of my clients. And so this is my experience of it. And then there was another one where I was preparing to do a photo shoot with a friend of mine. And then I dreamt, in one dream, I dreamt the sequence 1, 2, 3, which was really kind of cool. In fact, there were numbers in most of the dreams, and often they did correlate to the knight being either a 2 or 4 or something. And the weirdest dream I had with the Knight of Discs. Now, the discs sit at the bottom of the tree at Malkuth, and so with the 10s, and so they also connect directly to the 9s. And the 9s are, for me, a very interesting. The 9s in the tarot, the 9 themselves, they're very interesting cards, and they do some peculiar things. And the number 9 is also extremely interesting mathematically. So I think this dream is connected to the fact that the 10 is connected to the 9. And I had this dream. I was waiting on a square wooden platform that was rising out of the water. And I watched a woman who was trying to cross, and she would sink and reemerge. And then this giant of a man in a uniform, he appeared beside me, and he said nothing, but I felt he was there to kind of help. And for some reason, I had the sense that I was at a crossroads or meeting place for ghosts. And I just thought that was it was a very odd dream. And I did tell it to someone who is a medium, and they thought that it was actually connected to some sort of a ghost. It was because they had a similar dream, and that the uniformed man was the Archangel Michael, which is connected to the middle pillar. But one of the funny things I do remember sharing with my husband, that I was having trouble remembering dreams at that point with the Knight of Discs. And he said something really funny and I thought insightful. He said that it was because of the egotistical side of the knight. He would not easily share his treasures. And I thought, yeah, that's true. The knights are going to, it's theirs. They're not going to want to share with you any of their treasures. So anyway, so those are sort of my dreams and a little bit about each of the knights. Sort of in summary, I think in terms of the knights, again, the idea that how you start looking at a court card when you're doing a reading would be is, where do you start with it? Do you look at the fact that it is a fire, or is it a water? Do you look at the fact that it is, in my case, connected to the Kabbalah? So I always start with, as I said in the beginning, the idea that all the knights are part of the right-hand path. All the knights are connected to the second Sephirah, which, by the way, you can then go and study that and get some concepts and ideas, though initially it will not be very practical. When you read some of the books on Kabbalah, you're not going to see how you can apply the information right away. In my case, I learned everything experiential first, and then I started adding in the intellectual. And honestly, I'm glad I did that. So I trust my own experiences of the cards and thoughts. And also, by the time I had worked with them enough, I was able to sort of get what some of the intellectual side was referring to. And then remember, too, that working with the cards for instance, as a tarot reader versus working with the cards as someone that's using it to evolve their soul, it's a little bit different. And you're going to want to note the differences because of that. So what I have learned about the court cards has practical implications, and it's not just going to be esoteric. But I will say that it's very helpful when someone sits down and you say, okay, this person has a lot of the energy of the knights or the queens. It's very helpful in understanding who I'm already working with. And by the way, people will sometimes ask me, oh, I read the person's energy in the reading, or do I just, look at the cards? And I actually think it's more important to look at the cards and not the energy of the person. in terms of interpreting who they are. So for instance, someone can come in and had just a very bad moment right before they came in, and so their energy's off. But let's say underneath it, the cards are suggesting the person's generally calm right now, and they have a different energy. And that one is actually more accurate. And I've even seen that the case where you can sort of bring out an aspect of a person that they will acknowledge that they're not showing. So to me, the energies of the cards will be more representative of the people overall and not the energy of the person sitting down. However, you may want to consider their energy if they're kind of in a grumpy mood, or if they're seeming like they're spaced out, then you can do things to help them just get a little bit centered. But that doesn't mean that's who they are. And again, this is from doing a lot of readings and from seeing how it works. And that's the main thing when you go to use any of these thoughts about the nights, is you want to make it your own and think about the ideas, think about what feels right for you. I happen to be a person that likes to combine astrology with the tarot. You can certainly never use astrology with the tarot and still come out with probably a lot of brilliant energies. So I guess that's not true if you use the Kabbalah, since the Kabbalah is very much tied in to astrology. But nevertheless, you don't have to emphasize that. It's good to know, though, overall. And I did also want to give a shout out to Michael and I. We do readings. We sometimes forget to promote ourselves on our show because we love doing this show and we're trying to highlight others. But you can certainly book readings directly with us through our website, mysticraven.net. And we have, quite a bit of availability. We suggest that people book 24 hours ahead, though sometimes we can do a same-day reading. But me in particular, I'm on the go a lot. If I'm not doing readings, I'm out doing something else. So please try to book me ahead of time. So I think that basically the next time I'm going to go into the Queens. And I did consider the fact that it would have been perhaps a good idea to do the Knights and the Queens together, because they really do run into each other in so many ways, because they're part of the upper tree, the supernal triangle, which is in and of itself, I did a show on that a long time ago, is a fascinating aspect to the Kabbalah, so that the Queens and the Knights complement each other, and they also feed into each other through the card of the Empress overall. And I did notice that in some of my dreams as well. There was often things connected more to Binah, like oceans and waves and ponds. And so you begin to see that these energies are universal energies, I would say, overall. One of the things, too, that I think when you go to read the descriptions, if you do, I highly recommend that you do, if you use this deck, I absolutely recommend that you read the Book of Thoth and that you really consider what he says, because I think underneath it, sometimes there's a lot more going on. But I also feel like it's always good to read whatever books come out with the original publisher of the deck. And I think it's one of the things that people don't do enough. I think you should do that with Waite. Go and read Waite's book. Disagree with it, but at least, honor the tradition, honor the fact that these people, they put this together. And I'm a big person that believes in lineage and sort of appreciating where they're coming from. And also, like I said, you'll see later on, we talk about some of the other court cards where you'll see Aleister Crowley has a really good sense of humor, specifically when he's talking about the ones that represent his rising sign and his sun sign, which is actually quite obvious when you read it. So I think that's going to do it for me today. I appreciate you listening in. I know this one was a little bit more detailed. I decided to extend the show a little so I could read the quotes from Aleister Crowley's Book of Thoth. I will put the links to the books that I refer to in case you want to buy them. However, I'm not getting any paid promotion for them. This is just surely out of passion that I'm talking about this. But I appreciate you listening in, and I look forward to seeing you next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a magical week.